Dr. Kethavar Zilani stood before the massive crystal display in the High Council chamber and felt the weight of countless eyes upon him. The Zephyrian Confederation's most respected xenobiologist had studied over 300 different species during his long career, but this assignment was unlike anything he had encountered before. The holographic image floating before the council showed a small blue world orbiting a yellow star, unremarkable except for one crucial detail. It was the home of humanity. "The species calls themselves humans," announced High Counselor Veltar, his voice carrying the measured tone that all Zephyrians used for official business. "They achieved faster-than-light travel merely 50 of their years ago, yet they have already established colonies on 47 worlds and built a military fleet that rivals some of our older member species." Kethavar studied the rotating image of Earth with scientific interest. His people had been traveling the stars for over 10,000 years, building their confederation through careful diplomacy and superior technology. They had seen countless young species take their first steps into the galaxy, and most followed. Predictable patterns of expansion and development. Humans appeared to be different. "The hegemony has declared war on them," continued Veltar. "They believe humanity poses a threat to galactic stability due to their rapid expansion and aggressive tendencies. We must understand what makes these creatures so dangerous or so valuable, depending on one's perspective." The council chamber hummed with the quiet efficiency that characterized all Zephyrian architecture. Smooth walls curved upward to form a dome that displayed real-time images from across their vast confederation. Hundreds of worlds lived in peace under Zephyrian guidance, their conflicts resolved through logic and negotiation rather than violence. War was a concept that the Zephyrians understood academically but had not experienced for millennia. "Your mission is pure observation," Veltar explained. "You will board one of their military vessels and document their combat behavior. We need to understand how they fight, why they fight, and whether they truly represent the threat that the hegemony claims." Kethavar accepted the assignment with the calm professionalism that had made him famous throughout the Confederation. He had observed species in their natural habitats, studied their social structures, and analyzed their technological development. Military observation would simply be another form of scientific research, requiring the same detached analysis that he applied to all his work. 3 days later, Kethavar found himself aboard a Confederation transport ship approaching the human vessel UCS Denver. The ship was smaller than he had expected, roughly 300 meters in length compared to the kilometer-long vessels that the Confederation typically used for military purposes. Its hull showed the scars of recent combat, with patch marks where armor plating had been replaced and weapon systems that looked crude compared to Confederation technology. Captain Jake Morrison met him at the airlock, and Kethavar immediately noted the differences between humans and his own species. Where Zephyrians were tall and slender with pale blue skin and large black eyes adapted for their dim homeworld, humans were shorter and more compact, with a variety of skin tones and small eyes that seemed to constantly move and assess their surroundings. Morrison had dark hair streaked with gray and lines around his eyes that suggested either age or stress. "Welcome aboard the Denver, Dr. Zilani," Morrison said, extending his hand in the human greeting gesture that Kethavar had studied during his preparation. "We're honored to have such a distinguished observer with us." The handshake felt strange to Kethavar. Zephyrians communicated through subtle electromagnetic fields generated by specialized organs in their foreheads, allowing for precise and efficient information exchange. Physical contact for communication seemed primitive, yet there was something in Morrison's grip that conveyed more than simple greeting. It suggested strength, confidence, and perhaps a warning that humans were not as simple as they appeared. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez, the ship's tactical officer, was assigned as Kethavar's liaison. She was smaller than Morrison but moved with the same purposeful energy that seemed to characterize all the humans he observed. Her dark eyes held an intelligence that reminded him of his own species, but where Zephyrian intelligence was cool and calculating, hers seemed to burn with an inner fire that he could not categorize. "The crew is curious about you," Rodriguez admitted as she led him through the ship's corridors. "Most of them have never seen an alien before, except in military briefings about the enemy." Kethvar noted the ship's interior with growing puzzlement. The corridors were narrow and cramped compared to Confederation standards, yet the crew moved through them with practiced efficiency. Everything appeared to be built for function rather than comfort, with exposed conduits and mechanical systems that would have been hidden behind elegant panels on a Zephyrian vessel. Most confusing of all was the apparent disorder. Crew members called out to each other across the corridors, laughed at jokes he did not understand, and displayed emotions openly rather than maintaining the controlled demeanor that characterized civilized behavior. "Your species seems very expressive," Kethvar observed carefully. Rodriguez laughed, a sound that was both musical and somehow unsettling to his ears. "That's one way to put it. We're not much for keeping our feelings hidden, especially when we're heading into a fight." The concept troubled him. Emotional display was considered a sign of poor self-control among his people, a weakness that could lead to poor decision-making and inefficient resource allocation. How could a species that apparently lacked basic emotional discipline have achieved interstellar travel and built an effective military force? As Rodriguez showed him to his quarters, Kethvar began to compile his first observations. The humans appeared chaotic and undisciplined. Their technology was functional but crude, and their social interactions seemed to lack the careful protocols that maintained order in civilized society. Everything he observed confirmed the Confederation's initial assessment. Humanity was a young species that had achieved technological advancement without corresponding social development. Yet something nagged at him as he settled into his quarters that night. There had been something in Captain Morrison's eyes during their meeting, a quality that suggested depths beneath the surface chaos. The crew's apparent disorder might mask a different kind of organization, one that operated on principles he did not yet understand. His first report to the Confederation was brief and clinical, documenting the ship's specifications and crew behavior with scientific detachment. He noted their emotional displays, their inefficient use of space, and their apparently primitive command structure. According to all established theories of civilization development, humans should not have been capable of the achievements they had demonstrated. As the UCS Denver prepared to depart for its next mission, Kethvar settled into his role as observer, confident that the coming days would provide clear answers about human military capabilities. He had no way of knowing that everything he believed about logic, efficiency, and the nature of warfare was about to be challenged by creatures who fought not because they were savage, but because they were willing to die for something greater than themselves. The alarm that woke Kethvar from his meditation was unlike anything in his experience. Where Zephyrian alert systems produced calm, measured tones designed to inform without causing stress, the human klaxon seemed designed to flood the nervous system with urgent energy. Red lights flashed in patterns that hurt his large eyes, and the entire ship vibrated with activity as crew members rushed to their stations. "All hands to battle stations." Captain Morrison's voice echoed through the ship's communication system. "We have incoming hegemony forces at New Haven Colony. Estimated time to engagement, 4 hours. Kethvar made his way to the bridge, noting how the ship's atmosphere had changed completely. The casual joking and relaxed interactions he had observed during the previous days were gone, replaced by focused intensity that reminded him of his own species during important scientific experiments. Yet this was different somehow, charged with an emotional energy that he could feel even without understanding it. Lieutenant Rodriguez was bent over her tactical display, her fingers moving across controls with practiced precision. Charts and data streams flowed across multiple screens, showing the positions of human and hegemony forces throughout the New Haven system. The numbers were not encouraging for the human side. 12 hegemony dreadnoughts, she reported to Morrison. 4 heavy cruisers and 8 destroyers in support. We have the Denver, 3 other destroyers, and 6 frigates. Kethvar quickly calculated the force disparity in his head. The hegemony fleet outmassed the human defenders by approximately 4-1, with superior firepower and defensive capabilities. By all logical analysis, the humans should retreat immediately or attempt to negotiate surrender terms. Instead, Captain Morrison nodded calmly and began issuing orders for an attack. "We're going to hit their left flank," Morrison announced to his senior officers. "The Portland and Sacramento will take point, draw their fire while we and the Austin swing around their rear guard." Frigates will screen our approach and provide cover for the colony evacuation ships. The tactical plan was either brilliant or suicidal, and Kethavar could not determine which. It relied on speed, surprise, and precise coordination between multiple ships operating independently. More troubling, it assumed that human vessels could survive direct engagement with ships that were significantly larger and more heavily armed. As the UCS Denver accelerated toward the battle zone, Kethavar observed something that challenged his understanding of military efficiency. Captain Morrison called what he termed a final briefing, gathering the entire crew in the ship's main cargo bay through the internal communication system. What followed was not a tactical discussion or strategic overview, but something that defied categorization. "We all know what we're facing," Morrison began, his voice carrying clearly through the ship's speakers. "The odds aren't good, and some of us won't be going home after this fight. But there are 2 million civilians on New Haven, including families that some of you know personally." Engineer Carl Thompson spoke up from the crowd of crew members, his voice rough with emotion. "My daughter Sarah just started her first year at New Haven University. She sent me a message yesterday about joining the colony's botanical research program." Communications officer Lisa Park added her own story about her sister's family, who had moved to New Haven 3 years earlier to start a farming operation. Others shared similar connections: friends, relatives, former shipmates who had chosen civilian life on the colony world. Kethavar watched this display with growing confusion. Military efficiency required emotional detachment, yet these humans seemed to be deliberately increasing their emotional investment in the coming battle. Logic suggested that personal connections would cloud judgment and lead to poor tactical decisions, but the crew's mood seemed to be growing more focused rather than less. "Every minute we can buy them means more evacuation ships getting clear," Morrison concluded. "We're not just fighting for New Haven. We're fighting for the idea that humans get to choose their own future among the stars." The speech ended with the crew dispersing to their stations, but the emotional energy remained. Kethavar could feel it in the way they moved, the intensity of their preparations and the quiet efficiency with which they readied their ship for battle. This was not the cold professionalism of his own species, but something that seemed to generate its own power. When the hegemony fleet emerged from hyperspace, Kethavar finally understood why the Confederation considered humans dangerous. The enemy ships were massive, each dreadnought nearly a kilometer in length with weapon arrays that could destroy entire cities. Their formation was perfect, a textbook example of overwhelming force applied with mathematical precision. The human response defied every principle of logical warfare that Kethavar had studied. Instead of retreating or attempting to negotiate, the tiny human fleet accelerated directly toward the enemy formation. The UCS Portland, one of the other destroyers, led the charge with weapons blazing, drawing fire from multiple hegemony vessels, while the rest of the human fleet scattered into attack patterns that seemed chaotic but somehow achieved perfect coordination. "All weapons free," Morrison ordered, and the Denver shuddered as its main guns opened fire on a hegemony cruiser. The enemy ship's shields absorbed most of the damage, but return fire from the larger vessel hammered the Denver's own defenses, causing sparks to fly from overloaded systems and filling the bridge with the smell of burning electronics. Through it all, the human crew maintained their focus with an intensity that impressed even Kethavar's analytical mind. Damage control. Officer Tony Martinez coordinated repair teams that worked in sections of the ship that were open to space, using primitive environmental suits to restore critical systems while under fire. Chief Engineer Sam Turner rerouted power through damaged conduits with modifications that should have been impossible without extensive computer modeling. The battle's turning point came when the UCS Portland took critical damage from 3 hegemony dreadnoughts. Instead of attempting to withdraw and preserve the ship, Captain Ellen Foster made a decision that shocked Kethavar to his core. She ordered her crew to ram the Portland directly into the largest enemy vessel, sacrificing her ship and all 180 souls aboard to cripple a dreadnought that had been dominating the battle. The explosion was visible across the entire star system, a brief sun that marked the death of nearly 200 humans and the crippling of a hegemony vessel worth more than most planetary defense budgets. But the tactical effect was immediate. The enemy formation wavered and the surviving human ships poured through the gap with precision that suggested they had planned for exactly this possibility. "Portland crew, we see you," Morrison whispered, and Kethvar heard similar acknowledgments from other human ships across the communication channels. They were not celebrating a tactical victory, but honoring a sacrifice that had made victory possible. The remaining battle unfolded with a ferocity that challenged everything Kethvar thought he understood about warfare. Human ships darted between, the larger hegemony vessels like insects attacking giants, striking at vulnerable points and withdrawing before concentrated firepower could destroy them. When damage accumulated beyond repair capacity, human crews fought harder rather than surrendering, pushing their ships and themselves beyond theoretical limits. By the battle's end, New Haven was saved, but at a cost that staggered Kethvar's mathematical mind. Half the human fleet was destroyed or crippled, with casualties approaching 60%. The hegemony had lost 3 dreadnoughts and several smaller vessels, but their remaining forces were still formidable. Any logical species would have withdrawn after such losses, but the humans immediately began preparing for the next engagement. They treated their devastating casualties not as a reason to retreat, but as proof that their sacrifice had meaning. As he watched the crew of the Denver work through the night to repair their battered ship, Kethvar began to suspect that his understanding of warfare was fundamentally incomplete. These humans did not fight like machines calculating optimal outcomes. They fought like living beings willing to die for something greater than themselves, and somehow that made them more dangerous than any weapon the Confederation had ever encountered. The medical bay of the UCS Denver smelled of antiseptic and burned flesh, a combination that made Kethvar's sensitive respiratory system work harder to filter the air. He had come here to observe human medical procedures as part of his scientific documentation, but what he witnessed challenged every assumption he held about logical resource allocation and efficient crew management. Medic Danny Foster had been working for 38 straight hours without rest. His hands shook slightly from exhaustion, yet he continued to treat wounded crew members with a precision that impressed Kethvar's analytical mind. Nurse Katie Bell moved between patients with similar dedication, checking vital signs and administering medications despite the fact that she had sustained injuries of her own during the battle. "Shouldn't you rotate medical personnel to maintain efficiency?" Kethvar asked Foster during a brief moment when the medic paused to sterilize his instruments. Foster looked at him with eyes that were red from fatigue and stress. "These are my shipmates," he said simply. "I'll sleep when everyone who can be saved has been saved." The concept troubled Kethvar deeply. Zephyrian medical protocols emphasize the importance of maintaining healthcare provider wellness to ensure optimal patient outcomes. Working beyond safe fatigue levels increased the risk of medical errors and reduced overall system efficiency. Yet Foster's seemingly irrational dedication appeared to be producing superior results, with a patient survival rate that exceeded theoretical projections. Chief Mechanic Pete Garcia presented an even more confusing example of human behavior. The engineering sections of the ship had taken heavy damage during the battle, with critical systems operating at barely functional levels. Garcia led repair teams into areas that were structurally unsound, working with tools that were primitive compared to Confederation technology, yet achieving repairs that should have required shipyard facilities. "The neutron flow regulator is completely shot," Garcia explained to his team, while standing in a corridor that was still venting atmosphere through sealed breaches. "We're going to have to reroute power through the secondary manifolds and crosswire the plasma injectors to compensate." The modifications he described violated basic engineering safety protocols and should have resulted in catastrophic system failures. Instead, the repairs worked perfectly, restoring functionality to critical ship systems through innovations that no computer model could have predicted. When Kethvar asked how Garcia had known the modifications would work, the engineer simply shrugged and said he had felt it was the right solution. Such reliance on intuition over mathematical analysis should have been a sign of primitive thinking, yet the results spoke for themselves. Human engineering teams consistently achieved seemingly impossible repairs through methods that defied logical analysis. They appeared to understand their technology not through careful study of technical specifications, but through a kind of empathic connection that Kethvar could not categorize. The most disturbing observation came when he discovered Captain Morrison, alone in his quarters during the ship's rest period. The captain sat at his desk writing personal messages on old-fashioned paper, surrounded by casualty reports and crew personnel files. His movements were careful and deliberate, as if each word carried enormous weight. Kethvar had intended to observe human command structure during off-duty periods, but what he witnessed was something far more complex than military hierarchy. Morrison was writing letters to the families of crew members who had died during the battle, taking personal responsibility for losses that any logical analysis would classify as acceptable casualties given the tactical situation. "My deepest condolences for the loss of your son," Morrison wrote in one letter. "Jimmy was one of the finest engineers I've ever had the privilege to serve with. His sacrifice saved not only his shipmates but the 2 million civilians on New Haven. He died, as he lived, putting others before himself." The captain continued writing similar messages for each of the 17 crew members lost during the battle, crafting individual tributes that demonstrated intimate knowledge of their personalities, achievements, and family situations. This level of personal investment in subordinate personnel violated every principle of efficient command structure that Kethvar had studied. Zephyrian military doctrine emphasized emotional detachment to prevent commanders from making decisions based on personal feelings rather than tactical necessity. Caring too deeply about individual personnel would compromise a leader's ability to make rational choices about resource allocation and acceptable losses. Yet Morrison's obvious emotional investment in his crew seemed to increase rather than decrease their effectiveness. When the next hegemony attack came, Kethvar observed a transformation in the human crew that defied his understanding of military psychology. News of the approaching enemy fleet should have demoralized personnel who were still recovering from their previous losses and operating a heavily damaged ship. Instead, the crew responded with an intensity that surpassed their performance during the first battle. The tactical situation was even worse than before. 8 hegemony dreadnoughts supported by numerous smaller vessels were moving to attack a convoy of civilian evacuation ships. The Denver and 2 other damaged human vessels were the only defenders available, facing odds that made victory mathematically impossible. "We're going to buy those transports time to reach the jump point," Morrison announced to his crew. "Every minute we keep the hegemony busy means another 1,000 civilians reach safety." Gunnery Sergeant Roy Palmer took his position at the ship's main weapons array with the same calm professionalism he had shown during peaceful operations. When enemy fire disabled the automated targeting systems, Palmer switched to manual control, coordinating with his gun crews through hand signals and shouted commands that somehow achieved better accuracy than the computer-assisted systems. The battle developed into a running engagement as the human ships conducted a fighting withdrawal, trading damage for time, while the civilian vessels struggled to reach minimum safe distance for hyperspace jumps. Palmer's gun crews maintained continuous fire despite multiple hits to their weapons positions, with crew members manually loading ammunition when the automated systems failed. When a direct hit from a hegemony heavy cruiser damaged the main cannon's firing mechanism, Palmer made a decision that epitomized everything Kethvar had observed about human behavior. He entered the weapons housing manually to align the firing sequence, knowing that the next shot would kill him instantly due to the damaged safety systems. "Tell my wife I love her," Palmer transmitted over the ship's communication system as he initiated the firing sequence. "And tell my kids their dad went out swinging." The cannon fired successfully, its shot crippling the hegemony cruiser that had been threatening the evacuation convoy. Palmer died instantly, but his sacrifice allowed the civilian ships to complete their escape while the remaining human vessels continued their desperate fighting withdrawal. The battle ended with another impossible human victory, though the cost in personnel and equipment was staggering. 2 of the 3 defending ships were completely destroyed, and the Denver barely maintained basic life support systems. By any rational analysis, the humans should have suffered a decisive defeat that ended their resistance to hegemony expansion. Instead, they had achieved their primary objective of protecting civilian lives while inflicting disproportionate damage on enemy forces. More troubling for Kethavar's understanding of military science was the crew's reaction to their losses. Rather than being demoralized by the death of shipmates like Palmer, they seemed energized by examples of heroic sacrifice. "Roy showed us how it's done," Chief Garcia said during the post-battle repair period. "Now, we know what we're capable of when everything's on the line." Such logic was completely alien to Zephyrian thinking. Losses should reduce morale and combat effectiveness, not inspire greater dedication and performance. Yet the humans consistently demonstrated that they became stronger in the face of adversity, drawing power from the sacrifices of their fallen comrades. As Kethavar compiled his observations for transmission to the Confederation, he struggled to find appropriate terminology for phenomena that challenged basic assumptions about rational behavior. These humans did not fight according to any logical framework he could identify, yet they consistently achieved results that logic declared impossible. His reports grew increasingly complex as he attempted to document behaviors that his scientific training said should not exist. Each battle provided new examples of humans transcending their apparent limitations through means that defied analysis, leaving him with the uncomfortable suspicion that everything his civilization believed about the nature of warfare might be fundamentally wrong. 3 months aboard the UCS Denver had fundamentally altered Kethavar's understanding of warfare, yet he still could not explain the mechanisms that made human military effectiveness possible. His daily reports to the Zephyrian Confederation grew longer and more complex as he documented phenomena that challenged every established theory about rational combat behavior. Each engagement provided new examples of humans achieving impossible victories through methods that defied mathematical analysis. The ship itself had become a testament to human adaptability. Repeated battles had left the Denver operating with jury-rigged systems that should have failed weeks ago, yet Chief Engineer Sam Turner and his teams continued to maintain functionality through innovations that no design manual could have predicted. Sections of the hull were held together with improvised patches. Weapon systems operated far beyond their rated specifications, and life support equipment functioned despite damage that would have rendered any Zephyrian vessel inoperable. "How? Do you know these modifications will work?" Kethavar asked Turner during one of his frequent visits to the engineering sections. Turner looked up from a control panel that he was rewiring with components salvaged from 3 different systems. "Experience," he said simply. "You spend enough time working with these machines and you start to understand what they can really do, not just what the specifications say they can do." The concept of technological intuition was completely foreign to Zephyrian thinking. Their engineering was based on precise calculations and comprehensive computer modeling that eliminated uncertainty from the design process. The idea that machinery could perform beyond its documented capabilities through operator instinct suggested a relationship between sentient beings and their tools that his science had never encountered. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez provided another example of human capabilities that transcended logical explanation. During combat situations, she demonstrated an ability to predict enemy movements and coordinate tactical responses with a speed that suggested precognitive awareness. When Kethavar analyzed her decision-making process, he discovered that her choices were based on pattern recognition and intuitive analysis rather than systematic calculation. "I can feel what they're going to do," Rodriguez explained when he asked about her tactical methods. "It's like watching someone move and knowing where they're going to step next. The hegemony ships have patterns, and once you understand the patterns, you can get ahead of them." Such reliance on subconscious processing should have resulted in inferior tactical decisions compared to computer-assisted analysis, yet Rodriguez consistently outperformed automated systems. Her human intuition somehow identified opportunities and threats that the ship's most sophisticated sensors missed, suggesting that consciousness itself might be a form of technology that the Confederation had never properly understood. The true test of human capabilities came when the Denver became separated from the main fleet during a hyperspace navigation error. Captain Morrison's crew found themselves alone in a hostile system, surrounded by 6 hegemony vessels that had detected their emergence from faster-than-light travel. The tactical situation was hopeless by any rational analysis. 1 damaged destroyer against 6 enemy ships that were individually superior in firepower and defensive capability. Kethvar expected to witness surrender negotiations or desperate attempts to escape. Instead, he observed something that would haunt his consciousness for the rest of his existence. A human war council that operated on principles completely alien to his understanding of rational decision-making. Morrison gathered his senior staff in the ship's conference room. First Officer Nick Hayes, Lieutenant Rodriguez, Navigator Ben Clark, and Chief Turner. The meeting that followed challenged every assumption Kethvar held about logical command structure and efficient resource allocation. "We all know the situation," Morrison began without preamble. 6 enemy ships, no friendly support, and a damaged vessel that's running on spare parts and determination. Anyone who wants to suggest surrender can speak freely. The silence that followed was not the contemplative pause of beings calculating optimal outcomes, but something deeper that Kethvar could feel even without understanding. These humans were not weighing tactical options or considering survival probabilities. They were making a decision about who they chose to be in the face of certain death. "There's a civilian research station in this system," Hayes said finally. "About 300 scientists and their families. If we can draw the hegemony ships away from them, maybe they can evacuate before reinforcements arrive." Rodriguez nodded. Agreement. "We might not be able to win, but we can make the cost high enough that they think twice about targeting civilian installations in the future." The tactical plan they developed was unlike anything in Kethvar's experience. It was not designed to achieve victory or preserve the ship, but to inflict maximum damage on enemy forces while protecting civilians they had never met. Every element of their strategy accepted the crew's destruction as a necessary cost for achieving objectives that had no direct military value. "We're going to die well," Turner said simply, and the others nodded as if this was a perfectly reasonable strategic goal. The subsequent battle transcended everything Kethvar thought he understood about the nature of warfare. The Denver engaged 6 superior enemy vessels with tactics that should have resulted in immediate destruction, yet somehow survived long enough to inflict catastrophic damage on the hegemony formation. Human crew members coordinated impossible maneuvers through wordless communication that suggested a form of collective consciousness. When the ship's hull began to breach in multiple locations, Damage Control Officer Tony Martinez led teams into sections that were open to hard vacuum, using primitive environmental suits to maintain critical systems while under continuous enemy fire. Communications specialist Rachel Stone continued transmitting tactical data to other human ships in the region, even as the bridge filled with smoke and debris from overloaded systems. The crew's performance during the battle's final phase challenged Kethvar's basic understanding of individual versus collective consciousness. Humans who had been wounded or whose stations had been destroyed moved seamlessly to support other crew members, creating a fluid organizational structure that adapted to damage and casualties in real time. They functioned not as individuals, following commands, but as parts of a larger organism that maintained coherence even as individual components failed. Captain Morrison's final command epitomized everything that Kethvar had observed about human warfare. When all weapons systems had failed and life support was critical, Morrison initiated a ramming attack on the largest hegemony vessel, using the Denver itself as a weapon to cripple an enemy ship worth more than most planetary defense budgets. "All hands brace for impact," Morrison announced over the failing communication system. "It's been an honor serving with you." The collision destroyed both ships instantly, but the tactical effect rippled across the entire engagement. The surviving hegemony vessels, having witnessed a damaged human destroyer destroy their flagship through sheer determination, withdrew from the system rather than risk further losses to an enemy that clearly operated outside the boundaries of rational behavior. Kethvar survived only because Lieutenant Rodriguez physically forced him into an escape pod during the final moments, before impact. Her last words to him were not about his mission or his importance to galactic politics, but something that revealed the fundamental difference between human and Zephyrian consciousness. "Tell them we tried to do the right thing," she said as she sealed the pod's hatch, sacrificing her own chance at survival to preserve the life of an alien observer she barely knew. As his pod drifted in space awaiting rescue by Confederation forces, Kethvar realized that everything his civilization believed about logic, efficiency, and the nature of conflict was fundamentally incomplete. These humans did not fight because they were savage or primitive. They fought because they believed in something greater than their own survival, and that belief somehow made them capable of transcending every limitation that rational analysis said should constrain them. The rescue ship that eventually retrieved him was staffed by Zephyrian military personnel who had never experienced combat, serving a confederation that had achieved peace through superior technology and careful negotiation. As Kethavar looked at his own species' representatives, he saw them clearly for the first time. Beings who had achieved perfection at the cost of something essential that humans possessed in abundance. The soul-breaking truth was beginning to emerge, though he did not yet have words for it. Humanity's greatest weapon was not their technology or their tactics, but their capacity to love something more than their own lives. The High Council chamber felt different when Kethavar returned to deliver his report. The crystal displays that had once impressed him with their elegant efficiency now seemed cold and lifeless compared to the chaotic vitality he had witnessed aboard human vessels. The measured tones of Zephyrian discourse, which had always represented the pinnacle of civilized communication, sounded hollow after hearing humans speak with voices that carried the weight of absolute conviction. High Counselor. Veltar activated the recording systems with the same calm precision that characterized all Confederation proceedings. Dr. Zolani, present your analysis of human military capabilities and your recommendations for neutralizing the threat they represent. Kethavar had spent weeks preparing this moment, yet now found himself struggling to translate his observations into terms that his own species could understand. How could he explain that humans achieved the impossible, not through superior technology or tactics, but through a willingness to sacrifice themselves for abstract concepts that rational minds should reject? The human species represents a fundamental challenge to our understanding of warfare, he began, his voice carrying none of the confident authority that had characterized his previous scientific presentations. They consistently achieve tactical victories that mathematical analysis declares impossible, using methods that defy every principle of efficient resource allocation. The council members exchanged glances that Kethavar could read through their electromagnetic field communications. They expected a straightforward analysis of human weaknesses and recommended strategies for exploitation. Instead, they were hearing something that challenged the foundations of their civilization. During my observation period, I witnessed humans defeat numerically superior forces on 17 separate occasions, Kethavar continued. In each engagement, they employed tactics that should have resulted in their destruction, yet somehow achieved their objectives while inflicting disproportionate casualties on enemy forces. Counselor Murthak, the Confederation's leading military theorist, interrupted with a question that revealed the depth of their misunderstanding. What technological advantages do they possess that account for this disparity in combat effectiveness? None, Kethavar replied simply. Human technology is primitive compared to Confederation standards. Their ships are smaller, their weapons less powerful, their defensive systems inferior. Their advantage lies not in their tools, but in their willingness to use those tools in ways that rational beings would never consider. The recording continued for over 3 hours as Kethavar documented specific examples of human behavior that challenged established theories about logical warfare. He described Captain Morrison writing personal letters to the families of fallen crew members, Engineer Sam Turner maintaining impossible repairs through technological intuition, and Lieutenant Rodriguez coordinating tactics through pattern recognition that exceeded computer-assisted analysis. Most difficult to explain was the phenomenon he had observed repeatedly: humans becoming stronger rather than weaker in the face of overwhelming odds. Traditional military science predicted that casualties and equipment losses would degrade unit effectiveness, yet human forces consistently demonstrated improved performance as their situation became more desperate. They appear to draw strength from adversity, Kethavar explained, knowing how irrational this sounded to minds trained in logical analysis. The death of comrades does not demoralize them but inspires greater dedication. Equipment failures force innovations that improve their capabilities. Impossible odds seem to unlock potential that they did not know they possessed. The Council's Reaction was predictable. Several members dismissed his findings as emotional contamination from excessive exposure to human irrationality. Others demanded quantitative data that could be analyzed through established mathematical models. A few suggested that he had been deliberately deceived by human psychological warfare techniques designed to make their forces appear more formidable than they actually were. But High Counselor Veltar asked the question that went to the heart of everything Kethavar had witnessed. If humans are as primitive as you describe, how do you explain their consistent victories against the hegemony forces? The war's outcome supported every observation Kethavar had documented. Despite possessing superior technology and numerical advantages, the hegemony coalition had ultimately withdrawn from human space after suffering casualties that made continued aggression economically unviable. Human losses had been staggering, by any rational calculation. Yet their response to devastating defeats had been to fight harder rather than seek negotiated settlements. They cannot be conquered by any force that relies solely on logical calculations, Kethavar stated with the certainty of someone who had witnessed proof beyond refutation. Their strength comes not from technology or tactics, but from their willingness to die for concepts that rational minds dismiss as abstract: freedom, justice, loyalty to beings they have never met. The implications of his report created a crisis within the Confederation leadership. If humans could defeat superior forces through sheer determination and sacrifice, what did this suggest about the effectiveness of rational military doctrine? More troubling, if primitive emotional responses could overcome logical analysis, what did this mean for a civilization built on the principles of calculated efficiency? Counselor Zekran raised the question that everyone was thinking, but no one wanted to voice. Are you suggesting that our approach to warfare is fundamentally inferior to theirs? Kethavar considered his response carefully, knowing that his next words would either be dismissed as the ravings of a mind corrupted by alien influence or accepted as evidence that everything the Confederation believed about military effectiveness was wrong. I am suggesting that we have achieved a form of perfection that has cost us something essential, he said finally. We have eliminated emotion from our decision-making processes, but emotion appears to be the source of human strength. We have optimized our technology and tactics for maximum efficiency, but humans achieve superior results through methods that our computers cannot model. The silence that followed was unlike any in Confederation history. For the first time in millennia, the High Council was confronting the possibility that their carefully constructed civilization might be missing something fundamental about the nature of conflict and courage. What do you recommend? Veltar asked, quietly. We should not fear humanity, Kethavar replied. We should learn from them. A species capable of such sacrifice and determination will inevitably become a dominant force in the galaxy, not through conquest, but through the inspiration they provide to others. They have discovered something that we lost long ago: the power that comes from believing in something greater than your own survival. His recommendation was more radical than any proposal in Confederation history. Rather than seeking to neutralize the human threat through superior technology or diplomatic manipulation, he suggested that the Confederation should study human methods and attempt to understand the mechanisms that made their impossible victories possible. The debate that followed lasted for days, with the Council divided between those who dismissed human success as temporary luck and those who recognized the terrifying implications of Kethavar's observations. In the end, they reached a compromise that satisfied no one: continued observation without direct intervention, hoping that time would reveal the limits of human effectiveness. But Kethavar knew better. He had witnessed something that would haunt him for the rest of his existence: a species that transcended every limitation through the simple willingness to sacrifice everything for others. The soul-breaking truth was not that humans were superior warriors, but that they had preserved something that rational civilization had lost. Returning to his laboratory, Kethavar found himself fundamentally changed by his observations. He continued his research, but now sought to understand not just how different species fought, but why they chose to fight at all. His experience aboard human vessels had revealed a truth that challenged every assumption about the nature of consciousness and courage. As he looked up at the stars through his laboratory's observation dome, he knew that somewhere among those distant suns, humans continued to fight impossible battles and win them through means that defied explanation. They had shown him that the greatest strength any species could possess was not superior technology or logical thinking, but the capacity to love something more than their own lives. The Confederation would continue its careful observation and measured analysis, but Kethvar understood that they were witnessing the emergence of something unprecedented in galactic history, a species that became stronger through adversity and more united through sacrifice. Humanity's true weapon was not their ships or their tactics, but their willingness to die for others, and that made them effectively invincible against any force that fought only for survival. The soul-breaking truth was complete.